Take your clothes and leave, my husband said with a smile as he slipped his arm around the woman he'd been cheating on me with. Everything else in this house belongs to me. His friends laughed. His girlfriend smirked. They honestly believed I was walking away with nothing after 22 years of marriage. I looked around the beautiful home we'd built, quietly picked at my purse, and said, "All right." Less than 24 hours later, 6 moving trucks blocked the driveway. Police officers stood on the front lawn, and my ex-husband watched in stunned silence as workers emptied his dream home piece by piece. By sunset, the only thing left inside that mansion was the single chair my husband had owned before he met me. My name is Victoria Collins, and I'm 46 years old. Until 3 weeks ago, I believed I had one of those marriages people quietly envied. My husband, Daniel, and I had been together for 22 years. He was a respected architect whose name appeared in luxury home magazines. I owned a successful interior design company that specialized in high-end residential spaces. People admired the homes he built, but they fell in love with the spaces I created inside them. Our own house was the greatest example of our partnership. Daniel designed the structure. I chose every chandelier, every custom sofa, every antique mirror, every painting, every rug, every piece of furniture, even the handcrafted dining table where we celebrated every anniversary. Friends often joked that walking through our home felt like touring a luxury showroom. I always smiled because, in many ways, it was. For years, I believed we were building something permanent. Then little things began changing. Daniel suddenly started taking business calls outside. His phone never left his hand anymore. Weekend site inspections became overnight trips. He smiled at messages he never shared with me, then quickly locked his screen whenever I walked into the room. When I asked if everything was all right, he kissed my forehead and blamed work. I wanted to believe him. Love has a strange way of convincing you that obvious answers must have innocent explanations. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I came home earlier than expected after a client postponed our meeting. The house was unusually quiet. As I walked through the foyer, something bright red caught my attention. A silk scarf rested neatly over the back of the living room sofa. It wasn't mine. I picked it up slowly. The perfume lingering on the fabric wasn't one I owned either. My stomach tightened. When Daniel walked through the front door 30 minutes later, he froze the instant he saw the scarf in my hand. For a few long seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he let out a slow breath. "I'm tired of hiding it," he admitted. "There was someone else." No excuses. No denial. No apology. Just the truth, delivered as casually as tomorrow's weather forecast. The next hour passed in a blur. He admitted the affair had been going on for nearly a year. He said he'd found happiness again. Then, without raising his voice once, he opened a folder sitting on his desk. "Divorce papers." "I've already had everything prepared," he said. I stared at the papers before looking back at the man I'd trusted for over 2 decades. Then, he delivered the sentence he would soon regret for the rest of his life. "Take whatever belongs to you," he said coldly. "Everything else stays here." For a long moment, I simply looked at Daniel. No tears. No screaming. No desperate questions about why. The silence seemed to confuse him more than any emotional outburst could have. Finally, I nodded once. "If that's what you want," I said quietly. His shoulders relaxed, almost as if he'd expected a fight and was relieved to avoid one. "Good," he replied. "This will make things easier for everyone." Everyone. As though 22 years of marriage could be filed away like old paperwork. He slid the divorce papers across the dining table. I read every page carefully before signing my name. My attorney had always taught me that emotions fade, but documents last forever. When I finished, Daniel smiled for the first time that afternoon. "I knew you'd be reasonable." I smiled back. "I've learned not to make emotional decisions." He mistook those words for surrender. That was his second mistake. An hour later, the woman he'd left me for walked confidently through the front door as though she'd been invited to tour a luxury hotel. She introduced herself as Melissa with a polite smile that somehow felt colder than open hostility. She wandered from room to room, running her fingers across polished wood, marble countertops, and custom cabinets. "Oh, Daniel, she laughed. This place is incredible. It'll finally feel like home, he answered. I quietly listened while standing near the staircase. Melissa stopped in front of the grand crystal chandelier hanging above the foyer. I absolutely love this. Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You can redecorate anything you don't like. I almost laughed. Instead, I picked up my handbag. Before leaving, I turned toward Daniel one final time. I just want to clarify something. He looked impatient. What? You said I could take everything that belongs to me. That's right. And you won't object later? He rolled his eyes. Victoria, don't make this dramatic. I'm simply asking. He shrugged. If it's yours, take it. Melissa chuckled. Honestly, how much can one person own? Neither of them noticed the small smile that crossed my face. I appreciate the clarification, I replied. Then I walked out the front door without another word. The moment I sat inside my car, I stopped being a heartbroken wife. I became a business owner protecting her assets. My first call went to the operations manager at my design company. Tomorrow morning, I said, I need every installation crew available. My second call was to the warehouse that stored inventory for ongoing projects. The third went to my attorney, then the insurance company, then the transportation company that specialized in moving high-value furnishings. Every person I spoke with already knew exactly where to find the purchase records. Every invoice, every delivery receipt, every ownership certificate, every custom commission. Everything had been purchased through my business over the last 22 years. By midnight, the schedule was complete. At exactly 7 o'clock the following morning, 6 moving trucks would arrive at the house Daniel believed he had just won. At exactly 7 o'clock the next morning, the quiet neighborhood came alive. The first moving truck rolled into the driveway. Then another. And another. 6 trucks lined the curb in front of the house Daniel believed he owned. I stood across the street beside my attorney, a clipboard tucked under her arm. Professional movers climbed out wearing matching uniforms. Behind them came 2 inventory specialists, an insurance representative, and a locksmith. Everything had been carefully organized. Everything was legal. At 7:05, Daniel opened the front door wearing jeans and a coffee mug in his hand. The smile disappeared from his face. What is this? He demanded. The lead supervisor stepped forward politely. Good morning, sir. We've been hired by Ms. Victoria Collins to remove property listed on these ownership documents. Daniel frowned. Absolutely not. He looked toward me across the lawn. What kind of stunt are you pulling? I calmly walked over. No stunt. I handed him a copy of the inventory list. His eyes moved rapidly down the pages. The crystal chandelier, the Italian leather sectional, the handcrafted walnut dining table, the Persian rugs, every painting, every mirror, every designer lamp, every appliance purchased through my company, every custom office desk, every bookshelf, even the outdoor furniture surrounding the swimming pool. This is ridiculous, he shouted. They're part of the house. No, my attorney answered calmly. They're personal property, legally purchased by my client's business. Here are the invoices and ownership records. Daniel's face turned bright red. You can't just empty my home. Before anyone could respond, Melissa appeared beside him, wearing a silk robe. She looked from the trucks to the workers carrying clipboards. Daniel. He forced a confident smile. It's fine. It isn't fine, she whispered. The movers began their work. Each item was photographed, documented, wrapped carefully, loaded onto trucks. Nobody rushed. Nobody argued. They simply followed the inventory. Within an hour, the enormous living room looked strangely unfamiliar. The leather sofas disappeared. The coffee tables followed. The artwork came down one frame at a time. Without the carefully selected colors, textures, and lighting, the room suddenly felt cold. Echoes replaced elegance. Melissa slowly turned in circles. I never realized. She stopped herself. I finished the sentence for her. You never realized who actually created this house. Daniel pulled out his phone. I'm calling the police. You should, my attorney replied. It'll save us the trouble. 20 minutes later, 2 officers arrived. They reviewed every receipt, every ownership certificate, every serial number attached to the inventory. One officer finally handed Daniel the paperwork back. "Sir, these items legally belong to Ms. Collins. There is no theft taking place." Daniel stood speechless. For the first time since I'd met him, he had absolutely nothing to say. By early afternoon, nearly every room inside the mansion stood empty. Footsteps echoed through bare hallways. Sunlight reflected off vacant hardwood floors. Melissa walked slowly through the silent house before stopping in the center of the living room. She looked at Daniel, then around the empty space. "So," her voice barely rose above a whisper, "what exactly did you bring into this marriage?" Daniel couldn't answer. Neither could I, because sitting alone in the middle of that enormous empty room was the only thing that had always belonged to him. An old wooden chair. The movers were finishing the last truck when I walked back inside the house one final time. Every room echoed now. The expensive warmth everyone admired had vanished. Only one thing remained. That old wooden chair. Daniel stared at it with a mixture of anger and confusion. "You left that?" he asked. I nodded. "Of course." He looked around the empty living room. "Why?" I walked over and rested my hand on its worn backrest. "Because this is the only thing you owned before we got married." Neither Daniel nor Melissa spoke. I smiled sadly. Everything else came later. I slowly looked around the bare walls. When we bought this house, it was just concrete floors and empty rooms. You built the shell. I built the life inside it. My voice stayed calm. I spent years traveling to antique auctions, meeting craftsmen, negotiating with artists, designing every room until it reflected who we were. Every dining chair, every light fixture, every custom cabinet was chosen because I believed we were building forever. Daniel shook his head. "You're trying to embarrass me." "No. I'm correcting the story." Melissa looked from him to me. "You mean all of this was yours?" "My company purchased it." She frowned. But Daniel always said he paid for everything. For the first time, Daniel looked genuinely uncomfortable. "He simplified things," I answered. "The truth is less impressive." I didn't say another word, but the silence spoke loudly enough. Over the next several days, friends, neighbors, and even some of Daniel's colleagues began asking questions. They had seen the moving trucks. Rumors spread quickly, but facts spread even faster once people learned that every luxury piece leaving the house had documented ownership. The story everyone had believed, that Daniel alone had built a perfect life, began to unravel. Clients who knew my work started reaching out. Some admitted they never realized how much of Daniel's reputation had been strengthened by the homes I transformed after he finished building them. Meanwhile, Melissa's excitement faded. The glamorous future Daniel had promised suddenly looked far less certain. Without the elegant interiors, the expensive furnishings, and the polished image, she was seeing a different version of the man she'd chosen. 3 weeks later, my phone rang. "Daniel." Against my better judgment, I answered. "Victoria," he said quietly, "can't we settle this privately?" I thought we already had. This has gone far enough. I looked around my new design studio, where craftsmen were preparing furniture for another client. "No, Daniel. It only feels like it's gone too far because, for the first time, people are seeing the complete picture." Before he could respond, another envelope arrived at his house. This one wasn't from me. It came from the bank. The envelope from the bank arrived less than 48 hours later. It wasn't a foreclosure notice. It was a financial review. Without the furnishings, several business assets, and the carefully documented ownership records, Daniel suddenly had to explain financial obligations he had always assumed would remain hidden behind our marriage. His lifestyle was far more expensive than his income could comfortably support. Within 2 months, he quietly listed the house for sale. No one offered anywhere close to the price he wanted. Without the warmth, elegance, and character that had once made people stop and admire it, the house looked like every other large property on the market. Just walls. Just rooms. Nothing memorable. Melissa didn't stay much longer. The luxury she thought she was moving into had disappeared almost overnight, and reality wasn't nearly as impressive as the promises Daniel had made. We never spoke again. As for me, I invested the proceeds from my reclaimed furnishings into opening a second design showroom across town. Business grew faster than I expected. Clients weren't hiring me because of what I'd been through. They came because they finally understood whose vision had always brought those beautiful homes to life. Several months later, I happened to drive past my old neighborhood. The house was still standing, smaller somehow, not because its size had changed, but because its soul was gone. I smiled, not out of revenge or satisfaction, but because I finally understood something I should have realized years earlier. A home isn't defined by the person who claims it. It's shaped by the one who fills it with care, creativity, and honesty. Daniel believed he was throwing me out with nothing but a few suitcases. Instead, I walked away carrying everything that truly mattered. And for the first time in years, I wasn't leaving home. I was finally finding it.